Hey, you know that I'm Brian Downs and this is Pro Sex Studio, the channel where I talk about the sexual attitudes presented and revealed in popular entertainments, movie, television shows, and so on. Today we're going to be talking about episodes 1 through 3 of Season 2, recently released, of Sex Education, the Netflix series. If you're not familiar with the show, Otis is a teenager going to an upper-class British prep school, and his mother, played by Gillian Anderson, hot, is a sex therapist and expert and author. And so Otis has some expertise, or knowledge, I guess we'll say, of sexuality from what he's heard his mother talk about. And he winds up giving sex therapy to his fellow students. Couple of things. So you might say, hey, doesn't that sound sex positive? Well, except that Otis is 16 and has no actual formal education or training or certification and is taking money to give therapy to other teenagers on a subject he doesn't know that much about. He's just repeating things he's heard his mother say. So I don't know if this is a great idea, actually. Anyway, let's start with episode 1, which is called episode 1. And Otis is getting a lot of erections in all sorts of places and then masturbating. He stumbles out of a movie theater and into the public restroom in the theater to masturbate and so on. And this hilarious comic montage of this embarrassing frenzy climaxes in Otis whacking it in the car while he's waiting for his mother to come out of the post office or something. And Jean, again played by Gillian Anderson, finds him there. And that's embarrassing. So that's negative meme number 1. I have 12 negative memes that are repeated endlessly in popular culture that are designed to make you feel bad about your sexuality. And negative meme number 1 is the wanting disaster. Wanting sex, having sex, desiring sex, sometimes even talking about sex leads to a bad result. Now in this case it's sex with himself, but Otis is embarrassed. And his embarrassment isn't over. Because his unplanned erections and urge to masturbate are a major theme in this episode. It's 4 minutes into the episode when Otis is off to school in the morning, which allows Jean to retreat to her bedroom, where it turns out Jakob is waiting. Now, Jakob is a full-grown man, a man in the community, and Jean and Jakob are in a sexual relationship. Jean is divorced, and Jakob, I think, is a widower. In any case, they're a couple of consenting adults, but they're hiding their relationship from Otis because Otis is simultaneously trying to date Ola, who is Jakob's daughter. And Jean and Jakob don't want their children to be upset or disturbed by their relationship. So, two consenting adults having a sexual relationship in private have to conceal it because it will upset the people closest to them. This is probably its own meme. It's partly the wanting disaster. It's often part of the wanting disaster. Wanting or having sex leads to bad results. But the idea that your sexual relationship with person X is going to be damaging to your relationships with persons A, B, C, and D is very common. Very common. In narrative and in fiction. Not so much in real life. I really can't remember in my own life ever having a relationship with person X and thereby upsetting my friends and family. But sex is embarrassing. Sex is a bad thing. Sex is something that will cause trouble in your life elsewhere. Dangerous sex is one of the negative memes, by the way, that sexual situations are dangerous ones in one way or another. It's about 8 minutes into this episode when we learn that the school is in the grip of mass hysteria. People are running up and down the hall, shouting, wearing surgical masks. One of the students shouts, "There's a plague!" Ola says, "Why does it look like The Walking Dead in here?" Well, the reason is that there's been an outbreak of chlamydia. Chlamydia is a minor sexually transmitted infection that in the modern world is easily detected and easily treated with antibiotics. It poses little danger. But everyone's freaking out. What we're not seeing is sex, except for, Otis's embarrassing masturbations. What we see is public mass hysteria about sexuality and about chlamydia. Nah, which is a minor sort of health problem, easily treated. Everyone's freaking out. It looks like The Walking Dead in here. Now, the show is kind of winking at you. Oh, look at these silly people with their silly mass hysteria. But it's still presenting mass hysteria as the result of sexuality. And obviously in this exaggerated way, because you don't actually have near riots over a suspected case of chlamydia in a small community. It's still doing that. It's still presenting danger is sex. Now, here in episode 1 of season 2, Otis is insisting that he's out of the sex advice business, in part because his former partner in the business, Maeve Wiley, is no longer attending the school. Otis and Maeve have a whole unresolved sexual tension issue. But of course, Otis is soon handing out advice about chlamydia and tracking down the path of the infection. It's 21 minutes into this episode that things really heat up. Jean and Jakob go to Jakob's place. I'm not sure if it's Jakob or Jacob. He's from Scandinavia, and the show is set in the United Kingdom. I'm going to say Jakob. They go to his place, and they're going to have a sexual encounter. They think they're there alone, but unfortunately, Ola and Otis are upstairs, and Ola and Otis are trying to have a sexual encounter, and this is going to be, I think, Otis's first sexual encounter. But in spite of all of Otis's recent priapisms, when Ola puts her hand on his penis, he does not get an erection. And she's like, what's the problem? And he's like, I don't know what the problem is. And he's intensely embarrassed. Are you following this? Otis's erections are embarrassing and even possibly illegal when he starts whacking it in the car. His failure to get an erection is also embarrassing. He's always embarrassed. He's not having any fun in his sex life. It's always a source of anxiety and embarrassment and tension to him, even though he is the sex guru to his peers. So, Otis is so embarrassed that he flees the room with his pants half down, and he manages to trip down the stairs and wind up halfway down the stairs, which gives him a view of the living room, and this is how he discovers Jakob with Jean, his mother. There's a lot of confused shouting. Ola also comes running down the stairs in pursuit of the falling Otis. Jakob gets up, his pants half down, trips over the coffee table, falls down, smashes the coffee table, and says, I'm sorry! Jakob, a grown-ass man, in his own home with his own girlfriend, trying to have a sexual encounter, winds up with no sex, no coffee table, bruises on his ass, and finishes out the scene by yelling, I'm sorry. He has to apologize for his sex life to people who are in no way in his sex life, in his own home. Sex is bad. Sex is what's wrong with you. Your problem is sex. That's one of my negative memes. Jakob needs to apologize for wanting to have sex with Jean, who's 100% willing, but this is something he needs to apologize to other people for. Your problem is sex is a negative meme that says when a protagonist is interested in sex or tries to have sex, it's their character flaw. It's what's wrong with them. The flip side of that is it's villains who sex. Very often, villains are very sexy people who assert their sexuality and demonstrate it. This is also, of course, the wanting disaster. Jakob desired sex, tried to have sex, and winds up with a broken piece of furniture and having to apologize. Otis is very uncomfortable with the idea that his mother is having a sexual and romantic relationship with Jakob, although Jakob seems like a very nice guy. He's a contractor, seems to make a nice living, is a single parent, handy around the house, and Jean is crazy about him. So, gee, Otis, why don't you stuff it? And Jakob does not give Otis any trouble about wanting to date Ola. But here we are. It's 26 minutes into this episode when Jean, Otis's mother, attends a parents' meeting at the school to address the chlamydia hysteria, and Jean gets up and speaks and is regarded as the voice of reason, and people respond to her, and as a result she will be invited by school authorities to start working at the school, basically to revise their sex education curriculum. This episode moves toward its climax when two girls, Gwen and Marta, attack a third named Fiona. Gwen and Marta and Fiona are all in the school a cappella group together, and they are at the center of the chlamydia outbreak. Gwen and Marta both tested positive for chlamydia and then were treated for it and are now cured, and it was a minor problem that is gone away now. But they're convinced that Fiona was the source of this infection, although neither Gwen nor Marta have ever had sex with Fiona, so I'm confused about that. Anyway, they attack her out on the lawn. They run out there and attack Fiona. The biology teacher, Mr. Hendricks, when he sees this happening, goes, "Fight!" and runs outside to watch along with all the students. Mr. Hendricks is an idiot. We're going to get back to that. So there's this fight. Owen runs in. In fact, is pushed in to the fight by Eric, his friend. A pause and a note on Eric. Eric is black. His parents are African immigrants to the United Kingdom. Eric is also gay. Here's the thing though, Eric is a terrible friend. In this season, Eric laughs in Otis's face quite a bit. When Otis expresses anxiety or disappointment about what's going on in his personal life and his sex life, Eric laughs at him. Eric laughs at his erections. Eric laughs at him for getting caught masturbating by his mother. Eric laughs at him for his failure to perform with Ola. When Otis confides in Eric, Eric laughs in his face over and over and over again. And now, here's Eric pushing Otis into this three-way melee, although Eric himself isn't going to try to separate the girls. He just pushes Otis in there to do it. Eric's a jerk. So Otis goes in there. Luckily, Maeve Wiley shows up. She is being readmitted to the school because she has managed to make that happen with some schemes and a little blackmail, I think. And Maeve says, "Wait a minute, Gwen and Marta have both been having sex with that kid Owen, who is also in the a cappella group. It's Owen who is the source of the chlamydia infection." Well, we met Owen earlier in the episode when Eric and Otis were in the boys' room and Owen was crying in one of the toilets. Maeve explains now that Owen goes into the boys' room to cry in the toilet stall because neither Gwen nor Marta will admit publicly to their sexual relationship with Owen. It's not clear if Gwen and or Marta are aware that they're sharing a lover. Anyway, Owen gets his nose bloodied in this fracas. Afterward Otis gets his nose bloodied in the fracas. Afterward, he talks to Owen, and Owen says, "Well, Gwen and Marta won't admit to being in relationships with me because I'm boring and uninteresting," which is a little odd. We see Owen performing in the a cappella group. He's a standout musical performer. He's a little, I wouldn't call him classically handsome, but he's a standout musical performer, and he seems to be the only guy around here with 2 girlfriends. So, uninteresting doesn't seem to be the word to describe him. But in any case, that's what he says. Let me go back to Eric's bad behavior for a moment. Eric offers to take over Maeve's old job of scheduling the therapy appointments and then doesn't even bother to write them down. And when Otis says to him, "You're not doing a very good job," Eric is, "Don't come at me, man." Eric is a jerk. At the end of the episode, we see the a cappella group performing together flawlessly before an assembly. And Eric says to Otis, "I think we cured chlamydia." But what we don't see or even find out about is these sexual relationships. Is Owen still in a relationship with either Gwen or Marta? Are they going to admit to the relationship publicly? Are Gwen or Marta angry at Owen because he was in fact the source of the chlamydia infection? And why be angry about chlamydia? By the way, I want to point this out. Chlamydia is a very minor thing, easily treated. If you caught a cold from your lover, would you be angry at them for giving you the cold? No, you just get some medicine for it. So anyway, moving on. We don't see any of these relationships actually come back together. We don't know what's going on between Owen and these two women. They're singing, they're not having sex though. So by the end of the episode, everything's better because they're engaging in a totally non-sexual activity, and as far as we can tell, their sexual relationships have vanished. So moving on to episode 2. Episode 2 opens with a slow pan across some scattered clothes in a dimly lit bedroom, and a cover of Salt and Pepper's Push It is throbbing along in the background. Pan up to the biology teacher, Mr. Hendricks, absolutely failing to impress Emily, the English teacher, as they're having sex. Sexy pan across the clothes, reveal the embarrassing failure. Sex is embarrassing, the wanting disaster. She is absolutely failing to be impressed. By the way, he's wearing a shirt, she's wearing her bra. People in this show have sex with their clothes on a lot. No nudity. She says to him, "Have I been bad?" He's confused. "I don't know, have you?" She says, "Oh, for God's sake, Colin, call me a dirty bitch." He says, "I don't know if I want to." She says, "Say it, say it, say it." This is a sub-theme of my channel, bad behavior in female characters, that if a man did it, we would never accept. Try to imagine a scene where Colin asks her to say something, to talk in a certain way while they're having sex, and Emily says, "I don't know if I want to." And while he's penetrating her, Colin just repeats, "Say it, say it, say it." What would you think of that? Would we be going, "Yeah, Emily, say it. What's your problem?" No, we would think that Colin was a really unlikable guy, if not a monstrous criminal. But Emily can do it, and it's fine. And now Colin has to conform. Colin has to do what he's told. This is a theme in this show, and very often in fiction, that inadequate and failing men need to step up and be competent and commanding in the bedroom, but no one else in their lives. Mr. Hendricks, Colin, the biology teacher, is an idiot in every other way. He doesn't know up from down. He's a fool who couldn't lead people out of a burning building, but here he's supposed to be the boss. And I'm not sure how it is that Emily chose him. So Colin falls directly on his face right now with, "Okay, you're a lovely little female dog. You're lovely." So Jean Milburn, played by Gillian Anderson again, comes to the school having been invited to participate in the sex education curriculum by Maxine Tarrington, who is a school official above Headmaster Groff. And she addresses the student body, and this is very embarrassing to Otis, who is giving sex advice to his own peers anyway, so why should he be embarrassed about his mother, who is a published author and a sex therapist and a woman who has made her career out of this and has a formal education in it, giving sex advice. But he certainly is embarrassed about it. Here's another plot line in this episode. Otis's girlfriend Ola wants him to use his hand on her genitals. Ola has not told Otis this, he just keeps trying to steer his hand down her pants. Which is weird because whenever we see them in bed together, they're constantly asking each other, "Is this okay?" which is about as sexy as a swarm of ants. But in this case, she's just trying to push his hand down her pants. And Otis is not doing it. He's a little intimidated. He has no experience with this. What he does is he goes and does research. He looks something up online about a technique, and he finds a ridiculous thing called the clock technique. Eventually, he does put his hand down Ola's pants and starts muttering his own notes to himself. 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Ola says, "Did you say something?" And Otis says, "No, sorry, are you enjoying it?" He's been touching her vagina for maybe 10 seconds before he apologizes. Apologies are a real theme in this show. People apologizing to one another for their sex lives. Ola fakes an orgasm and quickly zips up her jeans, and now we're going to jump cut to her complaining about how unfulfilling this encounter was to her friend Lily Englehart. Last season, Lily's arc was that she's a intensely brainy, nerdy girl who is in her spare time writing a pornographic manga and really wants to have sex with just about, anyone who will volunteer. She just wants to have some sex. And is a brainy, nerdy girl with a nice little set of tits on her. Can't manage to find a sex partner. She comes on to Eric at one point. Boy, you misread that. Eric's gay, obviously. In any case, this is kind of the ridiculous thing, that her plot line is how she can't find sex. You're writing a pornographic comic book. Slender, young, and ready to go. Google for your closest Warhammer guild. Go down there and take your pick. Now, the biology teacher, Mr. Hendricks, is unhappy with his performance in Talking Dirty to Emily, so he goes to Otis for advice. He has heard on the grapevine that Otis gives advice, and he goes to Otis for the advice. Otis says, well, why don't you try writing a script for yourself? Do some research, prepare. Better advice is maybe you should find a sex partner who you mesh with more naturally. If you find yourself in a sexual relationship where you have to psych yourself up to engage in a certain activity, don't. Don't. If Talking Dirty is not something you enjoy, maybe you should find a sex partner who doesn't want you to do that. Colin tries again with Emily using Otis's advice. Another spectacular failure. Meanwhile, Otis goes to a lesbian classmate to ask for advice about fingering. He has learned through the grapevine, through Lily, that Ola was profoundly disappointed. Ola doesn't tell him, of course. Ola doesn't simply say to him, hey, listen, let's work on this. Lily has to tell him, so he goes to a lesbian classmate who condescends to him. Okay, I'll advise you, but only because I pity you. And ultimately, the lesbian classmate's advice is, ask your girlfriend what she wants and what she likes. Now go, we're done. So this whole scene is just to embarrass Otis more. He's making a good faith effort to try to improve his performance. He's a young man with very little experience. Embarrassment, 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 The Wanting Disaster. They should have called this show The Wanting Disaster. No one in the show seems to be enjoying their sex life except for Jean and Jakob, who we don't ever actually see have sex, and whose sexual relationship is the source of all tension in their families. There's even a subplot where Adam Groff, Headmaster Groff's son, gets kicked out of military school because of some schemes and counter schemes involving some homosexual encounters. Shame, failure, disaster. Hardly anyone is having any sex. One exception. At the end of this episode, Mr. Hendricks goes back to Emily and says, why do you enjoy Talking Dirty? And Emily says, I just want to feel sexy. So it turns out that he doesn't have to call her a dirty bitch, he just has to use a sexy tone of voice. So he pronounces the names of a lot of different kitchen implements and materials in a sexy voice, winding up with Baba Ganoush as they both thrust against each other in orgasm on the kitchen counter, while fully clothed again. That successful sexual encounter is played for laughs. And the character of Mr. Hendricks is kind of ridiculous. He has a stupid haircut, and he's orgasming while he yells Baba Ganoush over and over again. Even this successful sexual encounter is played for embarrassment. Otis goes to Ola and says, I know that I'm bad at fingering. We don't ever have to do it again. And Ola says, or I could tell you what I like. Yeah, Ola, there's an idea. Maybe you could try communicating honestly. But this is the message of this episode, is that these foolish and inadequate men need to go to the women and say, what do you want me to do and why? Well, maybe the women could have volunteered this information. It's an idea. Notice that Otis goes to her and his first instinct is to say, we never ever ever have to have sex again. Well, yes, obviously she can stop having sex with you. This isn't something you have to point out. That's as clear as daylight. And she says, or I could tell you what I like. Yeah. Like he has to go back to her to ask for permission. You're in a sexual relationship already. It's all right if you assume that that sexual relationship is going to continue, lacking any contradiction from her. Ola hasn't said, I don't want to have sex with you again. Ola hasn't said, I don't want you to touch my vagina again. But Otis assumes that their relationship hangs on a thread all the time. And that takes us to episode 3, which opens up with Olivia, who is a gorgeous young Indian girl Obviously ethnically Indian, but living in the United Kingdom, speaks English with an upper-class British accent, and is, one of the characters who attend the school. This episode starts with her riding her boyfriend, Malik, although Olivia is fully dressed in a belly dancing outfit because she was practicing her belly dance, traditional Indian belly dance outfit. Malik is underneath her, bare-chested. Again, the people who have sex in this show have it with their clothes on, which is interesting to me. I think this is something that happens in British entertainment, that you can show people bouncing against each other, thrusting, panting, moaning, but they have to have their shirts on, which is one of these weird little cultural things we do, that we draw that line. Why? Anyway, she has a shattering orgasm, but while she's doing it, she picks up a pillow and puts it over Malik's face. And, we zoom in on her face as she orgasms. And then Malik takes the pillow off his face and says, "Liv, you're crazy, you just did it again." And Olivia says, "I'm sorry." The title of this show should have been Sexual Apologies. That's going to be the name of my band. But when you start an episode with a beautiful girl having a beautiful fuck, you have to move immediately to the character of Amy Gibbs, who is the rather sweet but dumb girl who is Maeve Wiley's best friend. Interesting, by the way, that Maeve Wiley, who is presented in this show as being almost preternaturally intelligent, you can tell because she's a feminist, is good friends with Amy, who's not smart. But if you're going to start with a beautiful girl having some beautiful sex with a beautiful boy, you've got to cut to Amy Gibbs being sexually assaulted on a bus. A stranger starts masturbating against her from behind, and she stops, this is my stop, stops the bus, gets off the bus, looks down and realizes that the stranger ejaculated on her leg. We clearly see the semen on her jeans. Notice this. When we clearly see semen, it's in the context of a sex crime, a sexual assault. We certainly don't see that level of graphic detail in any consenting sexual encounter. In fact, it's pretty rare that anybody orgasms in this show in a consenting encounter. But when do we see a clear orgasm? A few minutes before, with the character of Olivia. So we have to immediately follow that with a sexual assault. Now, a lot of this episode will be taken up with Amy talking to Maeve about this. Amy doesn't at first seem to think it's a big deal. She regards it as a laundry problem. She's worried it's going to stain. She mentions it to Maeve in an offhand way, and Maeve insists that she report it to the police, which Amy should absolutely report it. And then the episode kind of develops that Amy is upset about it. She goes home and cries in her room at night. But again, we're going to start the episode with Olivia having vigorous orgasmic sex and immediately apologizing for what she did, and then we're going to move on to the sex crime. And that's mostly what happens in episode 3. So what we see is that in sex education, which kind of pretends to be sex positive because Otis is giving out this sex advice to his peers, even though he has nothing like any kind of qualification for this. But the show is about sexual shame most of the time. Relatively few people are having any sex, and almost no one is enjoying their sex life. The closest we've gotten is Mr. Hendricks, who is this clownish dolt, and Emily, the English teacher, who's much smarter than he is, except in her choice of Mr. Hendricks as sex partner. Why did you think he was the guy that was going to get it done for you? And we'll see what might develop between them. I doubt that their relationship is going to be a big thing. I don't see those two getting into a long-term situation. But in any case, sex negativity, the wanting disaster, over and over and over again. People want sex, try to have sex, and it causes all sorts of trouble. Jean and Jakob's sexual relationship is the source of all tension in their family. Otis's sexual relationship with Ola is mostly a source of embarrassment and anxiety for him, and disappointment for Ola. Eric's sex life is practically non-existent. These episodes have a subplot, by the way, where Eric is kind of flirting with the new kid, Raheem, who is ethnically Arab, I believe, but of French-speaking and now living in the United Kingdom. In any case, he's flirting with Raheem, and he can't figure out if Raheem is gay. Raheem keeps looking at you, and then sitting down next to you, and then talking to you, and then gives you a book of love poetry to read. And then Eric's like, wait, maybe Raheem's gay. Maybe, you think? What? This is flirtatious behavior. Clearly, people who sit down next to you and want to talk to you about love poetry are flirting with you. Anyway, what we do have is public hysteria verging on riot over chlamydia, shame, failure, inadequacy. Nobody really seems to be enjoying themselves. And that's the theme of the show. So we see, again, this negative attitude about sexuality. Now, you might say, hey, you need to have drama, you need to have conflict. Sure you do. But couldn't Otis's conflict with his mother be about something besides his mother's sex life? Couldn't Otis be having a successful and happy sexual relationship with Ola, and maybe the drama comes out of something else? Couldn't we have somebody having some fun that they're not immediately ashamed of and seeking advice for? So this is Pro Sex Studio. I'm Brian Downs. If you find this interesting, please like, subscribe, share, do the social media stuff. It certainly helps out the channel. I put up videos like this every week, examining popular entertainments and revealing the strong current of anti-sex negativity that is pouring out of your screens at you just about all the time. Thanks for watching.